So this week, guys, we're making a Salisbury steak recipe. I can't believe it's getting cold outside. I can't believe we're gonna start making more of these type of recipes, more of the comfort food, more of the stuff to warm you up on a nice cold day. You know, Salisbury steak has always been one of my favorites. It's super savory, it's delicious, it's easy to make. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you guys subscribe and like this video. And without further ado, let's get to cooking. Okay, so Salisbury steak. Now this is something my mom used to make all the time. This is kind of my rendition of it, but there's one thing I like to do before I make the meat mixture, and I do this when I make my meatballs as well. I like to saute a little bit of onions and garlic, so we're gonna do that now. I find it makes it a little bit better product instead of using garlic powder and onion powder. So I like to use the fresh garlic and the fresh onion. A little bit of olive oil in the pan. Now once this oil is hot, we're gonna add 1/4 cup of onion. You can also use a shallot if you want. This is a sweet onion, or maybe a yellow onion, I'm not sure, but we're gonna use 1/4 cup because I'm using 1.5 pounds of ground beef. If you're gonna make more Salisbury steaks or more meatballs, use a little bit more onion. A little bit of salt on the onion, not too much. It's gonna help to draw out some of the moisture. A little bit of black pepper. I'm not looking to fully caramelize these onions. I'm just wanting them to go translucent. We're just trying to take away a little bit of that bite from the onion. And also, if you don't wanna do this, onion powder and garlic powder, you can just use that in your meatball mixture, but this is better to me. Now we're gonna add the minced garlic. That was about 2 cloves of minced garlic. Now the same thing, if you were to just add raw garlic to your meat mixture, the garlic's probably not gonna cook all the way. I mean, it'll cook, but you might get a bite of some raw garlic in your meat, and then it's not gonna be very pleasant. So you wanna definitely just saute this garlic for 30 seconds to a minute, take away that bite from it. Now I'm starting to smell it now. It smells nice and fragrant. We're gonna let this cool for a few minutes, and then before we add it to the meat, because I don't want it to cook the meat, if you add this in hot, it'll start to cook some of that meat, and that's not what you want. There's a bacteria in food. You wanna make sure you're sticking with all the safety guidelines and stuff. So let this get to room temperature, and I'll be right back with you, and then we'll make our meat mixture. Okay, so now let's make our little steaks here. So I have 1.5 pounds of 80/20 ground beef. You can use leaner, you can use more fat. I like the 80/20, I think it's a good mix of meat and fat. We're not making meatballs, we're not making Italian meatballs, we're making Salisbury steak. So some of the ingredients that are gonna go in here are a little bit different. 1 cup of Italian breadcrumbs. If you're doing more meat, double the recipe. We have 1 egg going in. Pretty standard stuff for meatballs already, but now we're gonna get a little bit different here. We're gonna start off with about 1 tablespoon or 2 of some ketchup, Dijon mustard, about another 1.5 teaspoons or so, a few dashes of Worcestershire sauce, and then a nice big pinch of salt and black pepper. So also, let me give you a little trick. If you're gluten-free, you don't have to use the breadcrumbs. You can actually just use dehydrated potato, and it'll give you the same texture as using the breadcrumbs. So I've used that before, and it comes out really, really good. So just another little trick here if you don't want to have the breadcrumbs. But you definitely need something in here, otherwise the meat mixture will tend to be a little bit dry. So the breadcrumbs do tend to hold on to some of the fat and make your meat nice and juicy. I'm losing my mind, guys. I forgot to add in the onions and the garlic. So add the onions and the garlic into that mix as well. So now we're gonna mix this in, and then I'm gonna form these into little 4-ounce meatballs, and then we're gonna get our pan nice and hot, and we're gonna sear them off. So now we're ready to start cooking. What I have here is a 12-inch pan on medium heat. We're gonna add just a little bit of avocado oil. The reason for the avocado oil, it's a neutral oil, got a high smoke point. It's perfect for us searing our beef off. So now the oil's heated to 360 degrees because I want to get a very good sear on this meat. We're gonna go ahead and add these in, and I'm not gonna play with them. Once they're in the pan, we're gonna let them sear for at least a good 3 minutes. Now another thing that helps, you wanna make sure you press down slightly on each one of them so they make good contact with the pan. It'll help you get a nice sear on your meat. So these have been searing for about 3 minutes. I'm not concerned with cooking these all the way through because we still gotta let them simmer in the gravy. I'm just looking for a really nice sear. Now that sears flavor now. It's gonna add a little bit of a fond on the bottom of the pan too, which is gonna go into our gravy. But also it's like, you don't just want steamed meat. You want it to have some kind of crust on there. You know, if you were cooking a steak, you'd want your steak to have a perfect crust. You don't wanna have a steak that's, you know, just steamed. It's, you know, tastes terrible. So now since this is nice and seared, we're gonna let this go for another 3 minutes on this side. We're gonna go ahead and remove them from the pan now. We're just gonna set these aside. We'll add them back here in a little bit. So now we're gonna reduce the heat of the pan to medium-low. And we have a little bit of some nice fond on the bottom that's gonna add some nice flavor to our gravy. We're gonna start off with about 3 tablespoons of butter and then just a little bit of olive oil. So since now we're not gonna be cooking extremely high heat, we can use the olive oil and the butter. When you're searing meat, like I said before, you wanna use a neutral oil. Vegetable oil, canola oil, avocado oil is what I like to use. If you're just sauteing vegetables, olive oil is okay. Now once that butter is melted, we're gonna go ahead and add in our onion. Season the onion with a little bit of salt. It's gonna help to draw out some of the moisture. A little bit of black pepper. Now after a few minutes, these onions will start to caramelize just slightly. I'm not looking for full caramelization, just to get them a little bit sweat down. Now we're gonna go ahead and add in our mushrooms. These are cremini mushrooms. You can use baby bellas. You can use the little white button mushrooms if you like. Now I'm not a big mushroom guy, so I'm not gonna add too many mushrooms. I love the flavor of mushrooms, so if I had like a shiitake mushroom powder, that would be excellent in here, but you need the mushrooms when you're making Salisbury steak. Flavor of mushrooms is amazing. I'm just not a mushroom texture guy. You know, and a lot of times with the texture, it's because people don't cook them enough. You have to cook the mushrooms all the way down to remove some of that moisture, because if you don't, then they're kind of rubbery. So you might gotta make sure you cook them enough. So another thing, a little bit of salt on the mushrooms as well. It's gonna help to get rid of some of that water in them. So it's been about 7 minutes. Our mushrooms are nice and sweat down. We're gonna add in our minced garlic, a couple bunches of fresh thyme. I can smell that thyme, I can smell the garlic. It smells fantastic. We're gonna add a little bit of ketchup, about a teaspoon or so of some Dijon mustard, a few dashes of Worcestershire sauce. Give that a stir into the mushrooms and the onions. So now we have to thicken this gravy. If you can't have gluten, you can thicken it with cornstarch later on. I'm gonna add just a little bit of flour. And that way it'll thicken this gravy and let it coat our meat. Now we're gonna let this cook for about a minute, just to cook out that raw flour taste. Now it will simmer, so the raw flour taste will get cooked out anyways, but now we're gonna slowly add in the beef stock. Just a little bit at a time, so that there's no lumps. And this is just room temperature stock. Just keep mixing and mixing, and you'll see you'll start to get a gravy. Again, we can always adjust the consistency after. So like, let's say I end up adding a little bit too much stock. I can always thicken it with cornstarch later on. So keep that in mind. You can always fix it. And like I said, if you can't have the gluten, just thicken it with a little bit of cornstarch later on, or gluten-free flour. You can use gluten-free flour as well. Now, if you're following along with the recipe, I've added about 2 cups of beef stock total. And don't worry, the recipe will be on my website. I'll have all the adjustments there for you guys to follow along. Also, you want to keep in mind though too, you want it to be slightly thicker than you think, because by the time you simmer the beef in here, the beef's gonna release some of its fat or some of its juices into the gravy, and it's gonna thin it out just a little bit, so keep that in mind. So now we're gonna bring this up to a gentle simmer. I know it's gonna need a little bit of salt and pepper, so I'm gonna add a little bit of salt now, a little bit of black pepper. We can always adjust it later. Go ahead and give that a quick stir in. So now we're gonna add our little Salisbury steaks back to the pan. We're just gonna kind of nestle these in here. These all nice and coated in the gravy. Now we're gonna let this gently simmer for about 20 minutes. About halfway through, I'm gonna flip each of the steaks and we're gonna let it go for another 10 minutes on that side. So I'm gonna cover this with a lid, make sure it's just a gentle simmer. You don't want a rolling boil, you don't want anything to stick, you don't want anything to burn. So cover with the lid, and we're gonna let this go for about 10 minutes, give them a flip, and then another 10 minutes, and they should be done. Okay, so this has been simmering for about 15 minutes. After about 7 minutes or so, I just gave them a flip. I'm looking for an internal temperature to be around 160, because that's normally what people like. They like them to be well done. If you want them to be a little less than that, you can go about 140 if you want. And they'll be probably like a medium. They'll be just a slightly pink. Most people are gonna want them cooked all the way through, so you're looking for an internal temperature somewhere around 160, and then you'll know that they're completely cooked. So now what I'm gonna do, now we gotta adjust things. I'm gonna taste the gravy, and as you can see, it's nice and thick. I'm gonna taste it for salt. So just a little bit more salt, and that's why I always like to season at the end, or at least adjust it. It's easier to add a little bit more salt and pepper. It's harder to take it away. So just don't overdo it with the seasoning. Go ahead and stir that salt and pepper right in. I'm gonna finish this with a little bit of parsley for color. All right guys, let's go ahead and serve this up. So now I'm gonna serve this with a little bit of jasmine rice. You can also use a mashed potato if you like. Add 2 of our Salisbury steaks right there. Add some more of this wonderful gravy right on top. Just a little bit more parsley for some color. And there it is, guys. That's our beautiful Salisbury steak. Let's go ahead and give it a try. This is delicious. I don't know why I don't make this more often. I love the umami that the mushrooms give. Love the flavor of mushrooms. I'm just not a mushroom texture guy, but I really can't even tell about the texture in this. Our meat patties are very super tender because of that little bit of breadcrumbs that's in there. You can really taste the garlic and the onion that's in the meat. Like I said before, if you are gluten-free and you don't want to have the breadcrumbs, just use some dehydrated potato. It'll do the same effect as the breadcrumbs. Our gravy is very, very rich. A lot of umami in there. You can taste a little bit of the mustard. Try it with mashed potatoes, try it with rice. Whatever you guys want, it'll be good with it. Anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you guys try this recipe. And if you learned something, give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.